Ben Walker wasn't always tired, but lately fatigue had become a second skin. It clung to him, bone deep and constant. The kind of exhaustion that sleep alone couldn't cure. Every day blurred into the next in the small town of Pine Brook, a place where the streets hadn't changed in 20 years and the people weren't in a rush to leave. The rhythm of life there was slow, quiet, and sometimes suffocating. Ben was 34, though his face had aged more quickly than the calendar would suggest. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago, and his shoulders slumped under the invisible weight he carried. Most days he wore the same gray hoodie stained with oil and time, and he moved with a sort of cautious urgency, like a man constantly bracing for the next thing to go wrong. His morning started before sunrise. The alarm on his battered old phone rang at 5:10 a.m., followed by the ritual of dragging his aching body from the lumpy mattress in the one-bedroom apartment he shared with his daughter Lily. She slept in the bedroom. He took the couch, always had. The apartment was small, cramped even, but it was home. Bare walls, mismatched furniture, a flickering kitchen light he never had time to fix. The first sound every morning was always Lily's breathing, peaceful, rhythmic. Ben would tiptoe into her room and just stand there for a minute, watching her. Her chest rising and falling beneath a faded pink comforter decorated with stars and clouds. She had Rachel's face, his late wife. The same curious eyes, the same soft mouth. Sometimes, when Lily smiled in her sleep, it knocked the wind out of him, like Rachel was still there in pieces woven into the child they had created. Rachel had been gone for 2 years. The accident took her on a rainy September night. One moment she was driving home from her nursing shift, and the next, a semi-truck jackknifed across the highway, ending everything. The call came at 11:42 p.m. Ben still remembered the officer's voice. Calm, rehearsed, like he had said it 1,000 times. He didn't even cry at first. He just sat down on the floor of the kitchen and stared at the fridge, as if trying to process how a person could be alive 1 minute and a memory the next. The grief had come in waves, sharp, unexpected, and all-consuming. But the pain had taken a back seat the moment Lily woke up the next morning asking where Mommy was. That was the beginning of the new version of Ben Walker. Not the husband, just the dad. Just the provider, the protector, the man who had to figure out how to live without breaking in front of his daughter. Since then, life had become a balancing act. He worked 2 jobs, one as a part-time janitor at the Pine Brook Elementary School, and the other at a run-down mechanic's garage on the edge of town. He had always loved fixing things, even as a kid. Took apart his father's lawnmower when he was 12 just to see how it worked. But now it was just another way to survive. Wrenches and socket sets paid the bills, or at least tried to. Ben's dream had always been to open his own repair shop, a real one with a sign bearing his name, clean uniforms, and a waiting area with coffee that didn't taste like burnt rubber. But dreams cost money, and he barely made enough to keep the lights on. The garage he worked at was owned by a bitter old man named Carl, who rarely spoke in full sentences and paid in cash, under the table, off the books. It wasn't ideal, but it kept food on the table and gas in the truck. The janitor job came with a predictable schedule and access to leftover cafeteria lunches, something he didn't admit to anyone. Sometimes he wrapped an extra sandwich in a napkin for Lily, pretending it was from a special school lunch surprise. She always beamed with excitement, thinking her dad had somehow snuck her something magical. He never corrected her. Their routine was built on rituals, small moments that kept them both from falling apart. Breakfast was always a shared granola bar and a banana if they had it. Ben would walk Lily to the bus stop, rain or shine, her tiny hand gripping his calloused fingers like they were the most natural fit in the world. They'd make up stories about the people in the cars driving by, secret spies, magical princesses, talking dogs, pretending to be human. It was their game, their escape. Every evening, after a long day of grease, stained fingers, and slicked floors, Ben would come home, reheat something from a can, and sit cross-legged with Lily on the floor as they watched cartoons. She liked the colorful ones, the ones with animals that talked and danced. Sometimes she'd rest her head on his shoulder and fall asleep mid-episode, her mouth slightly open, her breath warm against his arm. On those nights, Ben didn't move. He just sat there letting her sleep against him, memorizing the feeling. Because no matter how heavy the world felt, she made it lighter. But the cracks were growing. He was 3 weeks late on rent. The landlord, Mr. Green, had left another pink slip on the door that morning with a polite but firm warning: pay by Friday or start packing. His truck was 2 oil changes overdue, the tires balding, the engine making a sound he recognized but couldn't afford to fix, and Lily needed new shoes. Her toes were starting to push against the seams of the ones she wore, the soles worn smooth. Still, Ben never complained, not out loud. He smiled through the struggle, laughed when he wanted to cry, and kept moving forward one step at a time. Because he had to. Because Lee depended on him. Because quitting wasn't an option. People in town liked him. They called him a good guy. The kind who helped neighbors move couches and fixed busted mailboxes for free. The kind who showed up early and stayed late. But being liked didn't pay the bills. And being kind didn't stop the world from being cruel. There were nights when he sat alone on the couch after Lily was asleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer he could keep juggling the pieces before something crashed. He thought about his wife, about the promises they made. He whispered to the dark, hoping maybe Rachel was listening, hoping maybe she could send a sign. He'd say softly, "I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm trying." Lily didn't know the full extent of how hard things were. She knew they didn't eat out like other kids. She knew most of her clothes came from thrift stores or kind donations from the school counselor. But she also knew her dad loved her more than anything. She felt it every time he kissed her forehead, every time he told her bedtime stories made up on the spot, every time he turned off the last light and said, "You're my whole world, Lily Bean." Sometimes she would wake up early and find him asleep on the couch, still in his work clothes, dark circles under his eyes. She'd cover him with her blanket, careful not to wake him, and then draw pictures of the two of them, hand in hand, smiling under a bright sun. One day she asked him, "Daddy, do we have a lot of money?" He paused, caught off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Sweetheart, because Mia said they're going to Disneyland and asked if I've ever been. And I said no. And then she said it costs a lot of money." Ben thought for a moment. "Well, we don't have Disneyland money, that's true. But we have each other. And that's pretty awesome." She tilted her head. "More awesome than roller coasters?" He laughed. "Way more awesome. Roller coasters go up and down. But we're solid." She accepted that answer because she trusted him. Because in her eyes, her dad was the strongest, bravest man in the world. That trust was both beautiful and terrifying. Ben knew how fragile it was, how easily it could shatter. He carried that responsibility like a stone in his chest, unseen but ever present. Every decision he made was for her. Every extra shift, every skipped meal, every sleepless night. He had given up his own dreams long ago. Now his dream was simple: to make sure Lily never felt the kind of fear he carried every day, the fear of losing everything. And so he pressed on, one wrench turn at a time, one hallway swept, one bedtime story, one whispered prayer, hoping, just maybe, that the universe still rewarded good people, hoping that someday, somehow things would change. Not for him, but for her. The sky was a heavy gray canvas as Ben Walker drove down Route 47, the main highway that stretched just outside Pinebrook. The road was mostly empty that afternoon, save for the occasional truck barreling past or a lone sedan hugging the yellow line. Rain clouds gathered ominously overhead, and the air held that sticky, expectant quiet that came right before a storm. The kind of quiet that made your bones feel uneasy. Ben's old Ford pickup groaned as it climbed a gentle hill, the engine coughing slightly as if complaining about the workload. He tapped the dashboard lightly, as if his touch alone might encourage the aging vehicle to keep going just a little longer. The radio didn't work, so the only sounds were the rhythmic squeak of the wipers and the dull thump of tires against asphalt. He didn't mind the silence, though. In fact, he'd grown used to it. He had just finished a half day at Carl's garage. Business had been slow, and Carl, never one to pay more than he had had cut Ben loose by noon. Ben didn't argue. Arguing with Carl was like trying to stop a river with your bare hands. He took it in stride, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and headed home. He had exactly $23 and some change in his wallet. Enough maybe for a small treat for Lily if he found a good deal. Those little chocolate eggs she loved. The ones with toys inside. He thought she deserved something sweet, especially after the week they'd both had. But as he reached the crest of the hill, he saw something odd up ahead. A black car, sleek, newer model, pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking erratically in the gray mist. Steam billowed up from under the hood, curling into the sky like a silent cry for help. A woman stood beside the vehicle, her posture tense, arms crossed over her chest. Even from a distance, Ben could tell she didn't belong there. Not in that suit, not in those heels, not on a desolate stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere. His first instinct was to slow down, then speed up. He was tired. He had things to do. He had a daughter waiting at home. But something inside him, a voice, a gut feeling, something he couldn't name, told him to stop. Ben pulled over about 20 feet ahead of the car and shifted into park. The truck wheezed slightly as if relieved to rest. He climbed out, wiped his hands on his jeans, and approached the woman slowly, hands raised slightly in that universal gesture of, "I'm not here to scare you." "Hey there," he called out gently over the sound of wind. "Car trouble." The woman turned to him. She was tall, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. Her blazer was damp from the drizzle, and she looked both annoyed and exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion from running late or missing a meeting. The kind that settled in your eyes when life had been too loud for too long. "Yeah," she replied, clearly frustrated. "It just started smoking and died. Won't even turn over now?" Ben nodded, already walking toward the front of the car. "Mind if I take a look?" "Be my guest," she said, stepping aside. Her voice carried the cadence of someone used to being in control, but there was a crack in it, like she'd been holding something together too long. He popped the hood and winced as a wave of steam hissed up toward his face. The engine was newer, but clearly overheating. He leaned in, squinting through the fog, his hands instinctively moving across the components with practiced precision. A cracked radiator hose, pressure buildup. It wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't something you could ignore either. Cracked hose. He muttered, mostly to himself. She's not going anywhere without a patch. He stepped back and glanced toward her. I can patch it temporarily, get you maybe 15 miles down the road to town, but you'll want a full replacement soon. Her eyes widened slightly. Really? You can fix it here? He shrugged. I've got a toolbox in the truck. Won't be pretty, but it'll get you moving. The woman hesitated, then nodded. I'd really appreciate that. Ben walked briskly back to his truck, pulled out a battered red toolbox, and returned to the vehicle. She stood beside him now, holding her phone in the air, trying in vain to get a signal. No luck. He could hear the frustration in her breath. No reception out here, he offered. Dead zone for a couple miles. Bad place to break down. No kidding, she muttered, pocketing the phone. I didn't expect to end up in the middle of nowhere. As he got to work, they fell into a silence. The only sounds were the patter of light rain and the occasional clang of tools. After a few minutes, she spoke again. Do you do this professionally? Ben chuckled. Not really. I mean, yeah, I work in a garage part-time. Fix cars, change tires, that kind of thing. Nothing glamorous. But I've been under the hood of one machine or another since I was a teenager. Kind of runs in the blood, I guess. She nodded thoughtfully. Well, you're very good at it. Thanks, he replied, tightening a clamp. What about you? Where are you headed? She hesitated, just passing through. Ben raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Everyone had their secrets. And sometimes people didn't want to be known. He understood that better than most. You from around here? She asked after a beat. Yeah, Pinebrook about 10 miles that way. He gestured with a nod. Small town. Quiet. Real slow pace. But it's home. She smiled faintly. I've been in the city too long. Maybe I could use some of that. Ben looked up at her as he wiped his hands on a rag. You look like city life wears you thin. She raised an eyebrow at him, half amused. Is that your subtle way of saying I look stressed? He grinned. Not at all. But you've got that look, the kind where your brain's been in overdrive for so long you forgot what silence sounds like. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she laughed. A real laugh. It was short and dry and carried more sadness than humor, but it was real. You're not wrong, she admitted. I've been dealing with a lot. Needed to get away. Clear my head. He nodded, tightening the last of the makeshift repair. Well, for what it's worth, this stretch of road forces you to slow down whether you like it or not. She tilted her head.
What's your name?
Ben. Ben Walker? I'm Isabel. He held out a hand. She shook it, firm, businesslike, but warm. Her hand was soft, her nails perfectly manicured. Definitely not the kind of hands that ever turned a wrench. Well, Isabel? Ben said, closing the hood. You're good to go for now. Just drive slow, keep an eye on your temp gauge, and head into town as soon as you can. There's a shop called Manny's just off Main Street. Tell him I sent you, and he'll get you squared away. She looked stunned.
Thank you, Ben.
Seriously. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. Ben shrugged. It's nothing. Just doing what I'd hoped someone would do for me. She reached for her purse, pulled out a small wallet. I don't have a lot of cash on me.
But I can?
He raised a hand. Don't worry about it. Really? But your time. My time's worth more when it's spent helping someone, not counting change. She studied him again, more carefully this time, like she was trying to figure him out, not in a suspicious way, but in a curious one, like he didn't quite fit into the world she was used to. You're a good man, Ben Walker, she said softly. He looked down, almost embarrassed. Just trying to raise my daughter right. You have a daughter, he nodded. Lily. 6 years old, smart as a whip. She's the reason I do everything. For a moment, something flickered in Isabel's eyes. A shadow. Regret, maybe. Or longing. She looked away toward the road. I hope she knows how lucky she is, she said. She doesn't need to know. She just needs to feel safe. That's all that matters. Another beat of silence. Isabel tucked her hair behind one ear, and took a step back toward her car. Well, thank you again. Safe travels, Ben said, backing away as she opened the driver's side door. She paused, then looked at him one last time. Maybe I'll see you around. Maybe. And just like that, she was gone, tires crunching on the gravel shoulder, taillights fading into the mist. Ben stood there for a moment, toolbox in hand, watching the space where she had been. He didn't know what her story was, but he could feel it. Something in her voice, the way she held herself. She wasn't just a woman with car trouble. She was running from something, or maybe toward something. Either way, she was like a gust of wind passing through, leaving behind the faintest trace of something he couldn't name. He turned, climbed into his truck, and started the engine. It sputtered, but roared to life. As he pulled back onto the road, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Just an ordinary day, just a stranger on the side of the road. But deep down, something told him it wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Ben Walker wiped his hands on an old rag and watched the rain slick the pavement as he pulled away from the stranded car. The world felt quieter in those moments. Muted raindrops, empty highway, and the unspoken echo of the woman's words lingering in the back of his mind. You're a good man, Ben Walker. He didn't know why her praise echoed so deeply in him, but he felt it like warmth through bone, like a note struck just right. For a while he drove with the windows cracked, letting the rain and fresh, sodden air drift through the cab of his old Ford. It felt cleansing, almost symbolic, as if the day's small triumph and small sorrow were leaving the world behind, carried off on tiny droplets of rain. Every time his wipers swept across the windshield, it was like wiping clean a part of yesterday's burdens. For a few brief moments, he just drove. No worries about rent, no wrench waiting at the garage, no kindergarten forms to fill out. Just the road and the rhythm of silence. Eventually, he drove into Pinebrook, its storefronts muted by drizzle and late afternoon shadows. The town seemed sleepy now, as if waiting for a shift that never came. A lone figure bunked down inside the diner at the corner, sipping coffee and reading a paper. A couple of cars were parked outside the hardware store. Aside from that, the streets lay hushed, almost hesitant, like each building held its breath. Ben pulled into his driveway, climbing out and stretching his back. The shoulder had a slight twinge from bending over the engine, but he barely noticed. He pressed the remote on his keychain, and the garage door's ancient motor rumbled open. Tools and spare parts littered the floor, backlog of unpaid invoices and repair tickets taped to the walls, a silent record of days he had spent trying to keep everything afloat. It didn't matter now that the truck was home. The rain had followed him, a blessing. Maybe it would soak the bruised grass his truck tires had trashed during the patch job. As he shut the truck off, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Carl, need you 8 a.m., don't be late. A simple reminder that this moment of quiet was temporary. He glanced upstairs and heard laughter, Lily playing with her dolls, making them talk in squeaky baby voices. His heart clenched, as it always did. She deserved so much more. He deserved less in his own esteem for not being able to give it. He stepped inside, shrugged off his wet jacket, and found Lily waiting by the stairs. She jumped into his arms and enveloped him in a hug that knocked the world out of focus. He held her tight. Daddy saved a lady's car today, he said, ruffling her hair. Did she say thank you? She asked, her eyes wide. She did, he replied. She said I was a good man. Lily grinned. Because you are. He kissed the top of her head. Yes, I am, but inside he wondered whether she would still believe that when the bills snapped back next week, when eviction notices stacked up again, when the phone line went dead at home because he'd forgotten the payment. The evening slipped into a routine dance. He warmed up canned soup while Lily talked nonstop about school science experiments, her teacher's new cat-themed bulletin board, a boy who kept handing out glittery stones to everyone. He listened, truly listened, letting her words wash over him. It was his favorite part of the day. She was fearless, hopeful, and unafraid to dream. Before bed, they sat on the edge of her mattress, and he read her a bedtime story. It was a silly fairy tale from a worn paperback, magic frogs, disappearing wardrobes, hidden treasures, something to send her into dreams of adventure. He lingered over each line, using exaggerated voices and dramatic pauses until she pulled the blanket up. "Good night, Daddy," she said softly, her voice thick with sleep. "Good night, Lily Bean," he whispered, heading out the door. He half closed the bedroom door and then leaned against it, breathing in her scent. Every morning he woke up not knowing how he'd get through the day, but last night he'd woken up knowing two things: he was a good man and he had to be even better. The next day started with dawn stretching thin across the sky and Ben's mind already racing. He couldn't let last night's memory slip away. He needed to build on it. He threw together a quick breakfast, oatmeal sweetened with a spoonful of brown sugar and a handful of nuts. Lily showed up at the kitchen table in her pajamas, yawning. "Did you sleep well?" he asked.
"Yeah," she said.
"Dreamed we were exploring a jungle together and you taught me how to swing from vines." He smiled. "That was a good dream, huh?" "Yeah," she agreed, her eyes drifting toward the window. "It was." He poured her oatmeal into a bowl and slid it across. "Eat up. We've got a day to conquer." She giggled. "We always do." He kissed her forehead and reminded her about the school bus. She hopped excitedly and ran upstairs to get ready, skipping like a tiny dancer practicing before an audience. He collected his tools, his uniform, and headed out. First stop, Carl's garage. Truth was, he hated going there on mornings after doing good. Carl was as miserly as ever. "I fixed some parts last night," Ben said as he rinsed his mug in the sink. "Should be ready for pickup." Carl nodded. "Good, I'll deal with it."
That was it. No praise.
"No thanks." And that was fine. Ben reminded himself he didn't do it for accolades. By mid-morning, he clipped off early from Carl's and headed to the elementary school. He called ahead and asked the janitorial manager if he could do extra hours, mop waxing the gym floor. She agreed. He set to work. Jim echoed his movements, mop, swipe after mop, swipe, floor gradually whitening, gleaming under harsh lights. That's when he felt it, the emptiness, not physical, but spiritual, like something was inside him missing its counterpart. He tried not to dwell on it, not now. He pushed harder, picked up a stubborn scuff mark, and scrubbed until his hands ached. By lunchtime, he was soaked in sweat. He left the gym and grabbed a sandwich from the cafeteria staff. Last of the day, it wasn't much, but Lily would love it. They had their moments. Little break from the gray. After, he drove to Manny's auto shop. He pulled into the lot and found Isabel's car, parked and waiting as if it had been standing guard all night. Next to it, a mechanic was replacing the hose properly. Ben watched, feeling a peculiar urge, like this stretch of road bound goodwill was following him. He walked over. "Hey, checking on it?" he asked the mechanic. "Yeah," the guy replied. "Cleaned up temporary fix, doing the full hose and system check." Ben nodded and rubbed his chin. "You're saving a lady some trouble." The mechanic looked up and gave a half smile. "Going to be good as new." Ben stepped back, turning to walk away, and froze when he heard footsteps behind him. Isabel stood there, hoodie soaked from morning rain, panting as she walked across the lot. "Hey?"
he said.
She smiled softly. They stood near her car, both silent for a moment, watching the mechanic. Every sense was aware. Sound of rain, smell of grease, hum of tools, warm hush of returning purpose. I wanted to say thank you again. She ran a finger along the fender. It would have cost me hours to get towed. I had a meeting in 10 minutes. You saved me more than time. Ben shrugged. Just did what felt right.
She nodded.
Funny how few people do that. He looked at her. Most people are wrapped up in their own stuff. She stared at him for a quiet second.
Yeah.
She smiled, almost sad. You still mad at me? About what? He asked. Her eyes flicked down. About what I said, that I'm dealing with things and running away. Ben paused. He could tell she was weighing words.
No, I get it.
Everyone needs a break sometimes.
She nodded, relief passing like a whisper. Everyone. He loped off across the lot. You've been doing fine, Isabel.
She laughed softly.
I don't feel fine. He sensed it. Something still clawing inside her, and he wanted more than anything to make sure she got what she needed. Maybe even beyond this stretch of hose and hood. For a moment, the mechanic finished the repair and stepped away. Ben took a breath.
Coffee?
He asked. She looked surprised. With you? He nodded. Looked like something heavier than a hose was broken. And sometimes a coffee is as good as a wrench. She hesitated, then nodded.
Okay.
They walked inside Manny's tiny office, walls plastered with old calendars and kids' drawings, smell of oil and stale donuts. Ben grabbed a couple styrofoam cups from the corner, filled them, stirred cream and sugar. 2 sugars for her, black for him. They sat on folding chairs by the workbench. The coffee tasted like a hospital mess at first, bitter and burnt, but after 2 sips, they both sighed. There was comfort in that too. It's strange, she said, staring into her cup. I come here thinking I'm escaping my world, but all I do is remind myself how broken other people's worlds are. Ben understood. He'd done that exact same thing, seen his own world reflected back in someone else's emptiness, felt small whispers telling him life could be better for both of them. She looked at him. You okay? He almost spat out the coffee, surprised by the question, but he nodded. I am. Better than I was. She smiled. Thank you. She took another sip. This means more than you know. He shrugged, but his throat tightened. Not every day a fixer and a single dad became someone's emotional anchor, glad to help. They sat in a silence that warmed both of them. No expectations, no obligations, just presence, enough to heal, if even a little. The rain slowed outside. The mechanic waved, saying it was all set. Isabel stood. Ben rose too. Thanks, she said again. He opened the door and held it for her. She stepped into the gray day, then turned to him. You could come with me. I could use some company for the drive. He hesitated. I can't leave Lily. She nodded. Of course. She looked down, then back up with a gentleness he couldn't explain. Someday, if you still want company, I'd like that. He felt his heart ricochet.
I'd like that too.
His smile, it wasn't big, just tiny, but it held warmth. She got in her car. The engine purred to life. She rolled down the window. Safe travels, Dad, she said softly, and then paused. Ben. He laughed. Thanks, Isabel. They watched each other for a moment, then she drove away. He stood there, rain beginning to fall again, and he realized something profound. This moment wasn't just part of her story. It was part of his too. He headed home, patch of good service, thread of hope breaking through the gray. He could feel things shifting. Not all of them would crack open yet, but he could sense a fracture, a breaking point turning toward light. At home, Lily asked about the day. He smiled, told her it had been interesting. She nodded knowingly. Good. He tucked her in again, kissing her forehead. As he turned off the light and reached for the door, he felt something settle inside him. It was early, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A shift towards something better, a promise of change. And in that quiet, the rain eased down to a whisper outside his window. The end of the rain, the start of something new. He could track the creeping dread on a calendar now. Every email from the landlord felt like a countdown. Another week, another threat, another reminder that their fragile sense of stability was slipping. He knew it wasn't just a pink slip plastered on the door anymore. It was a weight that had begun to crowd the hallway, reaching for every loose thread of hope he had left. More than once, he'd been tempted to pack everything, bed sheets, Lily's stuffed animals, his toolbox, and just leave. Head west, east, anywhere with a cheaper rent and less judgment. But the thought of uprooting Lily from her school, her few friends, her bedtime routine, those were non-negotiables. He couldn't tear her world apart, not now. So instead, he stayed, sinking further into the quicksand of bills and missed opportunities. His life had become a constant juggle. At Carl's garage, he put in 12-hour days, pushing past pain in his back and swelling anxiety in his chest. Carl didn't care that Ben was a single father. To him, he was a pair of skilled hands and nothing more. Some days, Ben could almost finish a repair before Carl barked an urgent instruction for another task. Late the night before, he'd stayed after hours working on Mrs. Peters's minivan so her grandkids could have it for the weekend. He didn't ask for pay. She had nobody else she could call. But Carl had found out and docked him for unpaid overtime. If you pull that again, Carl had said, "You're looking for another job." The words stung because Carl was right. Ben was disposable, very replaceable. His second job at the school was no safety net either. He swept, mopped, and emptied trash cans with practiced rhythm. Sometimes he found comfort in the routine, bouncing mops against tiled floors as he thought about better days. On other days, it made him feel small, like a janitor, not a father, not a builder, just a caretaker of someone else's pretense of normalcy. He went through the motions, wiping chalkboards and stacking chairs, listening to the hum of empty classrooms as though that silence might save them both. Home was no respite. The pink slip had been shoved under the door again. This time it mentioned immediate eviction if the rent wasn't paid within 5 days. The fridge had gone bare earlier in the day, and morning light would reveal the dried remnants of last night's dinner, 2 plain rice cakes and half a can of beans. The heat in the apartment had already been turned down twice to reduce the bill. Lily had tried to ask why she didn't feel warm, but he just hugged her and said Daddy was being careful. He had auctioned off his guitar 2 weeks ago. Bought at a pawn shop years prior, it was the only trace left of his dreams before Lily. When the buyer handed him the envelope, he could see disappointment in his reflection. But the trade was simple. One fewer dream, one more night. He didn't have to tell Lily he couldn't pay the bill. He'd turned the best song he'd never recorded into a hospital visit for his daughter. Because yesterday he had to take Lily to urgent care. She had developed a low-grade fever, cough, a cold that wouldn't break. It wouldn't break. He held her in the car as he pulled into the hospital parking lot, heart thumping, mind racing. The nurse told him the prescription would be $70 plus a co-pay he didn't have. He'd swallowed his wallet again and handed over a crinkled 20, producing it like a weapon. They let him go, just let him take her home. Instructions for fluids and rest. But he drove off with a guilt that wouldn't wash away. That night, Lily's cough lulled into quiet sleep, but Ben lay awake beside her, heart pounding. He pressed her small hand in his, stared at the ceiling, and vowed silently, I won't let her down. I won't let her memory become just another statistic. He needed help. He needed something, anything, to change. So when he woke the next morning to the ringing of his phone, Carl calling him early, urgently, he answered with a quiet resignation. I've got an odd job. Carl said, voice rough. Old Mrs. Hendricks. Generator went out at her house. You get paid. Ben hesitated. A generator job meant travel time more than an hour away. He had no spare funds for gas, but his gut told him to accept it. Every spare cent counted now. On rent, on groceries, on medicine. I'm in. He hung up and immediately Googled the route to Mrs. Hendricks's address. He packed his tools, grabbed Lily's thermos, kissed her forehead, and packed oatmeal in a microwave safe bowl. Be home soon, he promised her. For story time. She smiled, and it splintered something in him. That smile would be the reason he made it through. The drive to Mrs. Hendricks's home took him through familiar farmlands and open fields, the landscape turning more remote with each mile. He hit potholes that rattled his truck's frame. He gripped the wheel as much out of habit as to calm his frayed nerves. Rain clouds from multiple storms began gathering again, fringed in distant thunder. When he pulled into the Hendricks yard, a cottage aged by decades greeted him. Flowers from another century overgrew the porch. A single orange light glowed in a window near the roofline. He parked, grabbed his toolbox, and walked up the gravel drive. The house's wooden siding curdled with age. Mrs. Hendricks, small, frail, eyes clouded with years, greeted him at the door. Her voice was soft, trembling, not fragile but wary. She invited him in, pulled him toward the basement where the generator sat. Ben heard cicadas hum through shuttered windows. He knelt beside the machine and set to work swapping fuses, replacing spark plugs, cleaning out soot. Each twist of his wrist meant something for home. Each fix carried Lily's light in his mind. He didn't bother talking. He just worked. About 30 minutes later, the generator sputtered, then hummed. A faint shine of electric light glowed in the basement. Oh my, she whispered behind him. Young man, I don't know how to repay you. He shook his head. It's part of the job, Mom. Her eyes glistened. No one gives these days. I haven't had the light on upstairs in weeks. You've done more than fix wires. He rose, hefted his toolbox. Glad it worked. She pressed an envelope into his hand. $50. He took it, noticed tears. Don't spend it all in one place. He joked softly. She let out a small laugh. I worry for the world. It's people like you who remind me what's left of it. He tucked the envelope inside his pocket and walked back outside. He couldn't articulate why, didn't want to stir the vulnerable note in her words. The ride home bristled with regret and determination. Regret that he couldn't do more. Determination to turn things around. Evening came and Lily was curled under the blanket watching cartoons. She lit up when she saw him. Daddy! She called, and he sat beside her with the envelope in his pocket. He slid his wallet open and pulled the $50 bill. She peered in wide-eyed. Is that for me? He kissed her forehead. Well, it's for both of us. She nodded slowly. We're gonna eat all the pancakes tomorrow? He laughed.
War.
Pancakes, strawberries, whatever you want. She grinned and threw her arms around him. He squeezed her tight. She was his world. It kept him rooted. But the bills didn't stop coming. The next day, he paid half the rent and called the electric company to ask for an extension. They usually hung up on him until that time they asked him to prove he had Lily. They didn't ask again after he sent in a form from her school. His daughter, it turned out, opened doors in ways money couldn't. That same week, Lily's cough finally faded. She returned to school, but he still watched her like a hawk. He couldn't shake the fear something more serious was waiting. He tried to tell himself it was just the flu, just a cold, but the price for being wrong was too high. His schedule at Carl's was erratic. He was either buried under work or watching paint dry. Carl never appreciated the sacrifice. And then, midweek, Lily came home with a drawing in her backpack. It showed a big building with a sign, Dad's Garage. 2 stick figures, her and Dad, standing in front, smiling. She colored it with a rainbow sky. It broke something open in him. Tears stung his eyes, but he swallowed them back. He traced the lines, studying her hope. She believed in him even when he couldn't. He tucked the drawing into his wallet's photo slot, carrying it as proof that hope still existed. That weekend, he worked nonstop, changed oil, repaired brakes, replaced batteries, anything to generate cash. He didn't count the hours or track fatigue. He just moved. Each task was a step away from eviction, away from cold dinners, away from hospital visits feared but not yet happened. At night, he fell asleep exhausted. But when he woke, he still moved, drove Lily to school, watched her go, put in 8-10 hours at Carl's, then sneaked in odd jobs or janitorial shifts that filled his pockets with extra change. Slow progress, barely noticeable, but it was movement. It was survival. He knew he was juggling on ropes, fraying faster than he felt, but he convinced himself to focus on each rope individually, one job at a time, one rent payment, one medicine bottle, one fostered smile. Still, he was spiraling. He didn't tell Lily. He didn't tell anybody. He just kept moving forward until the day his landlord knocked. Earlier that Monday morning, Ben found a note stuck to the door. We're coming Friday morning at 8 a.m. No exceptions. No room for discussion, only the terse endpoint. He stared at it. The world that had held pauses in the creases of laughter and the splatter of cartoon reruns was slipping. Time was running out. His brain shifted into frantic jerks of desperation. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at the small kitchen table after Lily had fallen asleep, head in hands, lamplight sparing but accusing. His bare hands shook. The next morning's rent money he'd scraped from odds and ends wasn't enough. Even with Carl's work and Mr. Hendrix's generator, he was short. He stood, paced, headed out to drive around. Somewhere there was a solution. Another side job, maybe. He visited neighbors, planted flyers for odd jobs, clean gutters, fix fences, mow lawns, whatever. He knocked on doors. Some answered. If the work paid something, it paid. By Wednesday, he had enough to patch the threshold for 1 week. He called the landlord, promised full payment the next Friday plus half the current month. The landlord agreed, warned it was final. Ben exhaled briefly. Then he refocused on Lily's recital next week and the baby steps toward stability. He was still on the ropes, maybe hanging by his fingernails, but he was still swinging. He took pride in the fact that Lily didn't see the cracks. She only saw her dad, the hero who made pancakes from steaks and strawberries, the man who fixed houses and hearts. And in that pride, he found fuel to keep going. Because in this story, his story, the hero doesn't fall. Not yet, not while Lily still believes. The morning sun filtered through the half-closed blinds, casting thin golden lines across the living room floor. Ben stirred before the alarm went off. For a few seconds, the silence tricked him into thinking things were normal, even fine, but then the heaviness crept back in, the weight in his chest that had become so familiar it felt like an extra organ. He sat up on the couch, rubbing his eyes and glancing over at the clock. 5:43 a.m. He hadn't even made it to bed last night. He'd passed out while reviewing overdue bills scattered on the coffee table like little threats printed on white paper. An electric bill 2 months past due. A notice from Lily's school requesting a meeting. A bank account statement that barely registered in 3 digits. But the only thing louder than the silence was Lily's soft breathing coming from the bedroom. That sound, rhythmic and innocent, anchored him. As long as she was okay, he could take another punch to the gut. He stood, stretched, and made his way to the kitchen to put on coffee. The cheap, instant kind. It wasn't good, but it was hot and bitter enough to wake him up. As the kettle hissed, he poured Lily's cereal into a plastic bowl. No milk today, just dry puffs, but she didn't seem to mind as long as he added honey and called it morning treasure. By 6:20, they were out the door. Ben gripped Lily's hand tightly as they descended the stairs of the aging apartment building. She wore the same purple backpack, a bit too worn now, and the same sparkly shoes she adored, even though they had a tear near the toe. She still looked up at him with the same wide smile. "Daddy, guess what?" she chirped as they walked to the truck. "What, pumpkin?" "I drew us a big house last night, with a fireplace and a golden rug. I made it extra cozy so we could have tea time every day." He swallowed. "Hard." "That sounds perfect. And I made a room just for my books. And one for your tools." "You'd like that." "I would love that." He opened the truck door and lifted her in. "You're always thinking of everything." She smiled again, and for the next few minutes, as he drove her to school, he let himself imagine that house, the one with a fireplace and golden rug, a place where life didn't constantly feel like an uphill battle. A place where Lily didn't have to pretend her dry cereal was special, and he didn't have to lie about how fun it was to sleep on the couch so she could have the only real bed. After dropping her off, he went straight to the garage. Carl didn't say anything when he walked in, just jerked a thumb toward the far bay, where an old Chrysler sat leaking oil. Another busted job on a slow day. The work was greasy, but not hard. Ben preferred that. No small talk, no questions, just fix what's broken and keep going. Still, something had changed in Carl lately. He'd grown more impatient, more distant. Ben suspected he was bringing in another guy soon. Someone younger, cheaper, maybe with no kid to feed. He couldn't afford to lose this job, as soul-sucking as it had become. By lunch, his shirt was soaked with sweat, and his knuckles were scraped raw from a bolt that wouldn't budge. He sat on the stoop out back, unwrapping a peanut butter sandwich from tinfoil. There wasn't much to it, just bread, no jelly, but it was enough to get through the next few hours. As he chewed in silence, his phone buzzed. He glanced down, recognizing the number. It was Lily's school. His chest tightened as he answered. "Mr. Harper?" The voice on the other end said. It was Mrs. Colby, the assistant principal. "Would like to schedule a meeting regarding Lily. Nothing urgent, but it's about her progress and some things we've observed." His mind raced. Was she struggling? Acting out? Had someone noticed the worn clothes or her tired eyes? Is she okay? She's doing fine academically, but we've seen signs she's distracted, sometimes withdrawn. We know she's very close to you, and we just want to make sure she's supported in all ways. He nodded, even though she couldn't see. "I'll come in tomorrow morning." After the call ended, he stared at the sandwich in his hand. His appetite vanished. He finished the workday in silence, eyes tired, heart heavier than ever. The thought that Lily might be hurting because of their situation, because of his failures, rattled him worse than any past due notice ever had. That night, he tucked her in with a story, something about a magical fox who could turn sticks into candy. She laughed, the sound light and full of trust, and then she dozed off, hand curled around his finger. He sat there a while longer, watching her chest rise and fall, and wondered how much of her joy was genuine and how much was pretend for his sake. The next morning, He showed up at the school wearing his cleanest shirt and tried to hide the fact that he hadn't slept more than 3 hours. Mrs. Colby met him with a kind smile, but led him into a sterile office that felt too clinical for a conversation about Lily. They spoke for 20 minutes. She showed him drawings Lily had made, one of a monster towering over a tiny girl and another of a cracked heart held together with band-aids. Ben's eyes burned. She says her dad is the strongest man in the world, Mrs. Colby said softly. She clearly feels safe with you. But she also said something yesterday that gave me pause. Ben braced himself. She said, "Sometimes I try not to cough so Daddy doesn't get sad." He blinked. Once, twice. "She's very perceptive, Mr. Harper." He nodded. "She always has been." They offered counseling, vouchers for meals, support groups. He accepted what he could without letting his pride choke him. When he left the school, he sat in his truck for a long time. The image of Lily trying to hide her sickness from him shattered something in his chest. That night, he sat down with her on the floor. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "you know you can tell Daddy anything, right? Even if you feel yucky or scared or sad." She looked at him, her big eyes serious. "Even if it makes you sad too?" "Especially then," he said, pulling her into his arms. "That's what dads are for." She hugged him tight. "Okay. Then I'll tell you a secret." He leaned back. "Yeah. I don't like sleeping alone." "Not since the night you stayed on the couch?" His heart cracked, and he smiled gently. "Then how about a pillow fort tonight? Just you and me?" She lit up. With all the blankets, they spent the next hour building a lopsided but magical tent in the living room. She fell asleep under a ceiling of blankets and Christmas lights he'd strung up from the box of decorations he'd almost pawned last month. He stayed beside her long after she drifted off. And for the first time in weeks, he let himself cry. The following day, something unexpected happened. As he was locking up at the school after his janitor shift, he heard someone struggling with a car in the parking lot. A woman stood beside a sleek black Audi with the hood up, looking frustrated. He hesitated before approaching. "Need a hand?" She looked up, startled, then offered a tired smile. She was dressed in business clothes, expensive ones, though she wore them like an afterthought. Her heels were muddy, and her phone was dead in her hand. "I think it's the battery, or the starter. I don't know. It just died." Ben nodded. "Mind if I take a look?" She stepped back, and he got to work. In minutes, he'd figured out it was a loose terminal connection. Easy fix. He tightened it, gave the engine a few cranks, and the car purred to life. The woman looked stunned. "Wow. That's amazing." "Just experience," he said, wiping his hands. She reached into her purse. "Can I pay you?" He shook his head. "No need." She looked at him for a long second. Something passed between them. She seemed to see him, not just a janitor or a mechanic, something deeper. "At least let me buy you a coffee sometime." "I insist." He finally nodded. "Sure." "I'm Evelyn," she said, offering her hand. "Ben." "Thank you, Ben." She drove away, and he stood in the parking lot long after the taillights disappeared. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, quiet, simple, was the start of everything. The next few days were a blur. Carl gave him fewer shifts. Bills stacked higher. But Evelyn showed up again, this time with coffee. They talked in the lot, then at a nearby diner. She asked questions nobody else did. About Lily, about his past, about his dreams. He told her cautiously about his love of restoring cars. How he used to dream of owning a shop of his own. How everything got derailed when Lily's mom left. How he never regretted staying, even if it meant giving up everything else. Evelyn listened, really listened. One night over coffee, she asked, "What if things could change?" He smiled bitterly. Only way that's happening is if a miracle lands in my lap. She didn't smile. She just looked at him, serious and unreadable. You'd be surprised, she said quietly, what miracles look like. He didn't understand what she meant. Not then, but he would. Because behind that simple kindness was a truth he couldn't have guessed. The woman he just helped in a parking lot. She was worth more than 100 lifetimes of rent. And she wasn't just grateful. She was planning something. Something big. Something that could change everything. For him and for Lily. Forever. Ben woke up with something unfamiliar resting on his chest. Hope. It was subtle, like the first hint of spring after a long winter, but it was there, warm and cautious. For weeks, he and Evelyn had met regularly, sometimes by accident, sometimes not. They talked over cheap coffee, they sat on curbs, and once she even stopped by the garage, standing beside him as he worked on a busted Honda. He still didn't know exactly who she was, at least not in the way most people might ask. He knew her favorite color was gray because it reminded her of foggy mornings. He knew she never took sugar in her tea, but always added honey. He knew she had a scar on her wrist, a little crescent moon she never talked about but absent-mindedly touched when she got nervous. He didn't know what she did for a living, not exactly, but he knew she had a way of carrying herself that suggested she was used to being in rooms where decisions were made, big ones. And he knew she was kind. That morning, after getting Lily ready for school and making her the magic toast she liked, just regular toast with cinnamon and sugar and a story about fairies who cooked it underground. He checked his phone. A message from Evelyn waited for him. Meet me at the bookstore near 5th Street, 4 p.m. Trust me. He stared at the message for a long time. He didn't have a shift that afternoon. Carl had cut his hours again, but he had been planning to stop by another garage to ask about part-time work. Still, something about her message felt important. He spent the day finishing odd jobs around the neighborhood, replacing a neighbor's faucet, helping another move a broken couch, picking up a few extra bucks where he could. Every cent counted. Then, around 30:30, he headed to 5th Street. The bookstore was small but bright. It had a chalkboard sign out front that said, "New arrivals! Get lost in a story." Inside, the smell of paper and old wood filled the air. Evelyn stood near the children's section, flipping through a worn copy of The Little Prince. She smiled when she saw him. "Hey, you made it." "I was curious," he said, slipping his hands in his jacket pockets. "Didn't know you were the bookstore type." "Books are honest," she said. "They don't pretend to be something they're not. And they always wait for you, no matter how long it's been." He liked that. He liked how she thought in lines that sounded like poetry, but came out like facts. She led him to a table near the back, 2 mismatched chairs tucked underneath. She sat down, folded her hands in front of her. "I want to talk to you about something," she said, "and I need you to listen all the way through before you say anything." He nodded, heart thudding in his chest. Her tone was different, firmer, more intentional. "I haven't been completely honest with you," she said. "Not because I didn't want to be, but because I needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" "Off you." He didn't know what to say. Her eyes locked onto his. "Serious?" "Unwavering. My name is Evelyn Cartwright. I run an investment firm. I own part of 5 tech companies, 3 real estate chains, and I serve on the board of 2 philanthropic organizations. I'm not just well off. I'm what people call filthy rich." Ben blinked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. She continued. "When we met that day, in the parking lot, I was on my way back from a conference. My assistant was supposed to pick me up, but my car broke down. You came over and helped me without asking for anything in return. No awkwardness, no assumptions, just kindness. Ben exhaled slowly, the words slowly sinking in. I started coming back because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, she said. What it feels like to be real with someone, to talk without a price tag, to be seen. He leaned back, the legs of his chair creaking. And now what? You want to give me a check or something? No, she said firmly. I want to offer you a chance. A real one, not charity, not a handout. An opportunity. He crossed his arms. What kind of opportunity? Evelyn pulled a manila folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside were papers, diagrams, and a rough business proposal. I bought a small repair shop on the edge of town. It's been closed for years. I want to fix it up and open it again with you as the manager. You'd run the operations. I'd fund the renovations and back it for a year. After that, if the business is stable, I'll sign it over to you completely. Ben stared at her, unsure if he'd misheard. His brain scrambled to make sense of it. You want to give me a shop? I want to invest in you, she said.
You know cars.
You know hard work? And you care? That's all I need to know. His mouth went dry. Why me? Because you helped me without knowing who I was. Because you love your daughter enough to build her pillow forts instead of buying her toys. Because you didn't let life turn you bitter. He looked down at the folder, overwhelmed. I don't have any money, he said quietly. I can't invest. I can't even keep the lights on half the time. You don't need to. Evelyn said, I've got the capital. You've got the soul. We partner. You build something. You make it yours. A long silence passed. Finally, he looked up. What if I fail? She smiled gently. Then you fail with someone who believes in you. And we try again. Tears pricked his eyes. He blinked them away. I don't know what to say.
Say yes,
She whispered. He did. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Evelyn handled the purchase paperwork. Ben walked through the old shop, dusty, filled with cobwebs, tools rusted, and walls cracked. But he saw something in it, not just a building, but a future. He worked late nights, scrubbing it clean, repainting, hauling in old equipment. Evelyn arranged for better tools, but always let him lead the design. Lily would visit on weekends wearing overalls and pretending to be the boss. She'd scribble logos in crayon, insisting the garage be called Lily's Gears. Ben laughed, but in the end, he painted the name on the side of the building in big, hopeful letters. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ben stood outside the nearly finished shop with Evelyn. The air smelled like sawdust and hope. I still don't get it, he said. All of this.
why me?
Evelyn turned to him. Because I needed reminding that not everything of value is measured in dollars. And you reminded me of what matters. He looked down, heart full and trembling. You saved me. She smiled.
No, Ben.
You saved yourself. I just opened the door. The grand opening happened 2 weeks later. The neighborhood came out in full. Former clients from his old jobs stopped by, many offering business right away. Local reporters took notice, and Evelyn, true to her word, stood at the back quietly, letting him shine. After the ribbon was cut, Ben took Lily's hand and walked her through the shop. She beamed, showing off the book corner he'd built just for her, filled with donated stories and soft pillows. This is your magic house? He told her, voice choked. She looked up, eyes wide. With a golden rug, he knelt down and hugged her. Even better. That night, after everyone left, Ben sat outside on the stoop. Evelyn joined him, handing him a cup of tea. I owe you everything, he said softly. You owe me nothing, she replied. Just keep going. He looked at her, the woman who walked into his life by accident and changed everything by design. What now? He asked. Now. She smiled.
You live? You thrive?
And maybe you help the next person who's where you used to be. And that's exactly what he did. The shop grew. His pride grew with it. Lily thrived in school, laughing more freely. Ben hired others down on their luck, young men who needed a shot, single mothers needing a steady paycheck, ex-cons needing someone to believe in them. He became a ripple in a still pond, and all because one day he stopped to help someone who, at the time, seemed to need him. But in truth, they needed each other. Not for money, not for status, but for humanity. For the reminder that kindness, freely given, can lead to doors you never knew were waiting. And sometimes, all it takes is fixing a car. The months that followed the grand opening of Lily's gears were the busiest of Ben's life. The shop flourished beyond anything he could have dreamed. Word spread quickly about the single dad who fixed cars with honesty, compassion, and a little help from a mysterious investor no one really knew. Customers came in from across the city, sometimes even from nearby towns, just to support his business. The sign bearing Lily's name became something of a symbol not just of repairs, but of new beginnings. But success, Ben learned quickly, brought with it a different kind of pressure. The kind that doesn't just press down on your shoulders, it seeps into your bones. The kind that makes you question whether you're truly worthy of the life unfolding around you. He was grateful every single day, but he was also tired. Really tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away after a night's sleep. There were still bills to pay, tools to fix, employees to manage. And on top of that, he had to be a dad, something he never took lightly. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and painted the clouds in streaks of orange and rose, Ben sat on the curb outside the shop, watching Lily draw flowers in chalk along the edge of the sidewalk. She was humming to herself, her knees dusty, her small fingers stained in color. That sight, simple as it was, centered him, reminded him why he was fighting so hard to hold everything together. Evelyn pulled up just as Lily was finishing her masterpiece. She stepped out, carrying a paper bag filled with takeout. Ben smiled weakly, standing up to greet her. "I thought you might not have eaten," she said, handing him the bag. "You'd be right," he said, again. They sat on the shop steps as Lily showed Evelyn her chalk garden. Evelyn beamed, as she always did around Lily. Something had softened in her since they met. Her steel exterior hadn't vanished, but it had found warmth. Ben had watched her grow just as she had helped him rise. Over dinner, Evelyn was quieter than usual. "What's on your mind?" Ben asked gently. She paused, twirling a plastic fork in her salad. "I got an offer." "For?" "A buyout. One of the largest firms in the country wants to acquire my entire investment portfolio. They're offering more than I've ever been offered before." Ben's eyes widened. "Wall? That's huge." "It is. It would mean retiring. No more boardrooms, no more endless flights. I could breathe." He nodded, sensing the catch. "But it would also mean letting go. And maybe disappointing a lot of people who depend on me." Ben looked at her, really looked. For all her power, all her composure, she looked scared. "You've built an empire," he said. "But I think maybe you're still trying to figure out what part of it feels like home." That made her laugh softly. "Yeah. Something like that." There was silence for a moment before she turned to him. "What about you? You've got employees now. You've got a steady flow of work. You've got people counting on you too. How do you carry that?" Ben took a deep breath. "One moment at a time. I keep my head down and remind myself that if I could survive when I had nothing, I can survive this too." She smiled at that. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the cot he'd set up in the shop's small back office. Ben sat with Evelyn under the dim light outside. I don't know what I'm doing half the time, he admitted. Some days I feel like I'm just pretending to be a grown up. I worry I'll let everyone down. You haven't let anyone down, she said. You've inspired people, including me. He turned to her. You ever feel like the better things get, the more you're waiting for the other shoe to drop? All the time. She whispered. They shared a long look. It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it was intimate in its own way, a shared understanding between two people who had built walls to survive and were slowly learning to let others in. But just as things seemed to be settling into a rhythm, life threw its next punch. It came in the form of a letter. Ben had gone to check his mailbox one morning while Lily brushed her hair and got ready for school. Among the usual stack of utility bills and advertisements was a formal-looking envelope with the name Sandra Jacobs printed neatly on the return address. His breath caught in his throat. He sat down at the kitchen table, fingers trembling as he opened it. Inside was a neatly typed letter. Dear Ben, I know this may come as a shock, but I need to talk to you. It's been years. I know I left. I abandoned you and Lily, and there is no excuse that will make that okay. But I've gotten help. I've spent the last year in treatment, and I'm stable now. I want to make things right. Please meet me. Just once. For Lily's sake, if not mine. Sandra. He stared at the paper for what felt like hours. He could hear Lily's footsteps, her little voice calling out, Daddy, I'm ready. He shoved the letter into his jacket pocket and plastered on a smile, but his heart was somewhere else entirely. The rest of the day passed in a fog. He went through the motions at the shop, fixed 2 oil leaks, trained a new apprentice, but his mind was stuck in the past. Sandra, the woman who had once been the love of his life. The woman who had left in the middle of the night with a note and a suitcase and never looked back. He hadn't told Lily much about her mother. She was too young to remember, and Ben didn't know what to say that wouldn't cause more confusion or pain. So he'd always just said she had to go. That night he called Evelyn. She came over without hesitation. He handed her the letter without a word. She read it carefully, then looked up. What are you going to do? I don't know. He whispered. I hated her for so long, but now I don't even know what I feel. Do you want her back in your life? I don't know if I can trust her, he said. But part of me wants her to see Lily, just once, to know what she missed. They sat in silence for a while. Whatever you decide, Evelyn said, you won't face it alone. Ben met with Sandra the following weekend. He didn't take Lily. He needed to see her first to gauge whether this was real or another ghost from the past. They met at a coffee shop just outside the city. When he walked in, he barely recognized her. She looked older, thinner. Her eyes had lost the wild gleam they used to carry. She stood when she saw him, but he didn't move to hug her. Hey, hi, she said quietly. He nodded. Hi.
They sat.
For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she said, you look tired. He huffed a bitter laugh. Parenting will do that to you. I'm sorry, she said, for everything. Or for leaving, for not being there. I was sick, Ben. I didn't see it at the time, but I was drowning. I know, he said, but you left. And Lily, she doesn't even remember you? Tears welled in Sandra's eyes. I deserve that, but I want to try to be a part of her life. Maybe just letters at first, or picture. I don't expect to walk back in. He looked down. Let me think about it. And he did. For weeks, he talked to Evelyn, to a counselor, to himself in the mirror. Eventually, he told Lily the truth, a gentle, age-appropriate version of it, that her Mom had been sick but was getting better, and that she wanted to know Lily again. Lily was quiet for a long time, then said, "I she nice." "She used to be," he said honestly. "I think she's trying to be again." Lily looked out the window. "Maybe she could come to one of my piano recitals someday. But not yet. I want to know her in pieces." That broke Ben in the most beautiful way. He shared Lily's words with Sandra, and to his surprise, she agreed. "That's fair," she said. "I'll wait for as long as it takes." Ben stood outside the shop that night, watching the stars emerge one by one. Evelyn joined him, as she always did when the weight got too heavy. "You did something brave," she said. "I don't feel brave," he replied. "I feel cracked open." "Sometimes that's the only way the light gets in." He turned to her. "You're good at showing up when people need you." She smiled. "That's what people do when they love someone." He froze, breath catching in his throat, but she didn't pull the word back. And he didn't ask her to. Maybe they didn't need a label yet. Maybe love was showing up, listening. Standing still when someone wanted to run. Maybe love was handing someone a wrench and believing they could fix something, even if they were broken themselves. And maybe, just maybe, they were all healing, slowly, painfully, beautifully, one moment at a time. The days grew longer and warmer as spring rolled into summer. The chalk flowers Lily once drew on the sidewalk in front of the garage had long since faded, washed away by spring rains. But real ones bloomed now, potted marigolds and daisies that Evelyn had brought by, just to brighten things up. Lily tended them religiously, as if their survival depended entirely on her care. Maybe in a way, it did. The shop was thriving, too much almost. Ben had hired 3 more mechanics and was looking into buying the lot next door to expand. There were days he walked through the garage in disbelief, wondering if it was all some strange dream he would eventually wake up from. But the truth was, it was real. And so were the challenges that came with it. Managing success, it turned out, required just as much courage as surviving struggle. Some nights, Ben still lay awake with spreadsheets spread out beside him and 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind. Was he making the right choices? Could he sustain the momentum? Would Lily be proud of him 10 years from now? Lily, for her part, was blossoming. She was still his silly, imaginative girl, forever inventing games, naming the shop tools like pets, and turning the office into a makeshift fort when no one was watching. But she was growing up too, in ways that were hard to ignore. Her piano playing had become confident and expressive, her curiosity deeper, her questions more complicated, especially the ones about her mother. Ben had honored his promise. He hadn't rushed Lily. He had let her take the lead. And over time, she had begun writing letters to Sandra, sometimes small, sometimes curious, sometimes hesitant. Sandra never pushed. She always responded with gentle honesty and let Lily guide the pace. One evening, Lily sat at the kitchen table, a letter open in front of her. Her brow was furrowed in thought.
"Daddy," she asked.
Yes, sweetheart.
"Do you think Mom would want to come to my recital?" Ben hesitated. "Do you want her to come?" Lily looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. I think I'd like to see what her smile looks like. I don't remember it." Ben swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing into his chest. "Then we'll invite her." He texted Sandra that night. She responded quickly, gratefully, with a promise to sit quietly in the back, unnoticed, if that's what Lily needed. The day of the recital arrived in a flurry of nerves and excitement. Lily wore a white dress Evelyn had helped her pick out, her hair neatly braided, her fingers twitching with anticipation. Ben, dressed in his best button down, holding her hand as they entered the auditorium. Evelyn met them at the doors, holding a bouquet of tiny purple lilies. "Knock I'm dead, kiddo, she whispered to Lily, who grinned and gave her a high five. Sandra arrived minutes before the show began. She slipped in quietly, her eyes searching until they met Ben's. He gave her a small nod. She took a seat in the last row. When Lily walked onto the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and looked out just for a second. Her eyes landed on Ben, on Evelyn, and then on Sandra. She blinked, gave the smallest nod, and turned to the keys. Her fingers danced. The notes were soft at first, then stronger, fuller. She played with her whole heart. Every emotion, every bit of her journey, echoed in the music. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The applause thundered. Ben stood and clapped the hardest. Afterward, as they gathered outside, Lily tugged on his sleeve. Can I talk to her? Just for a minute, Ben looked at Sandra, who was standing at a respectful distance. He nodded. Lily walked over, slow but steady. Sandra knelt to meet her eyes. Hi, Lily said.
Hi, Lily. Sandra replied softly.
There was a pause. Then Lily handed her a small piece of paper. I drew this for you. It's a flower. It's kind of messy, but I think you'll like it. Sandra's hands trembled as she took the paper. It's beautiful. Lily nodded. I'm still getting to know you. But thank you for coming. And just like that, she walked back to Ben. Later that night, they drove home in silence. But it wasn't heavy. It was full. Ben tucked Lily in, kissed her forehead, and lingered a moment longer than usual. She seems nice, Lily murmured sleepily. She's trying. Ben replied. She looked like me. She really did. Yeah. Can we all be okay? Even if it's a little weird. Ben smiled. I think we already are. Weeks turned into months. Summer deepened. Lily's garden at the shop bloomed wildly. Customers continued to flood in, not just for service, but for the story. The story of the single dad and his daughter, of a garage born out of a broken down car and a broken down life. Of Evelyn, the billionaire who had it all and still found something she didn't know she needed in that small, greasy garage. And Evelyn had changed too. She had taken the buyout offer, sold off her holdings, stepped down from her positions. Her name no longer flashed across stock tickers or boardroom reports. It was strange, at first, to let go of the identity she'd built for years, but it was freeing too. She bought a modest house not far from the shop. She started volunteering at local schools, helping kids learn about entrepreneurship. And she stopped wearing suits every day, traded them for jeans and ponytails and sneakers. She also stopped running from herself, from vulnerability, from love. One evening, she stood with Ben on the shop roof. They just finished watching Lily chase fireflies in the lot. Feels like a different life now, Ben said. It is a different life, she replied, because we chose it. He looked at her. Are you happy? She nodded.
Yeah.
Are you? He didn't answer right away. He watched the stars appear one by one. Then he turned to her and said, I'm scared. But yeah, I'm happy. She smiled. Good. There was a silence that followed, not uncomfortable, just full of possibility. I was thinking. Ben said, maybe we could take Lily somewhere. Just the three of us. Like a little vacation. I'd love that. We never had the money or time before, but now you have both. He laughed. Thanks to a flat tire and a billionaire with a bad GPS, she nudged him with her elbow. And thanks to a single dad who didn't give up. He looked down at the shop below, at the life they'd built. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't stopped to help you that day? He asked. All the time, she said. And I wouldn't trade this for all the power or money in the world. He turned to her. And for the first time in all the time they'd known each other, he took her hand. It wasn't grand. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real, grounded, full of hope. The kind of moment that comes after everything else, the struggle, the pain, the heartbreak, and says, you made it, you survived, and now you get to live. Down below, Lee looked up and waved. They waved back. And in that moment, under a sky full of stars and a future wide open, everything felt exactly as it should be.